you ready to explore exciting careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies? Then join me, your podcast host, Dr. Milena Krastenskaya, or simply Dr. K, and my amazing guests on the Neurocareers Doing the Impossible podcast. Discover what it takes to turn the impossible into reality. Tune in now to a thrilling episode number 78. Dear listeners, welcome to the Neurocareers Doing the Impossible podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Walter Piper, a research engineer at Neurable and an accomplished neuroscientist and data scientist. With a rich background in both theoretical and experimental neuroscience as well as data science, Dr. Piper is a luminary in the field of brain-computer interfaces, focusing on applications that can profoundly impact mental health and human behavior. Dr. Piper's journey in neuroscience has unveiled numerous opportunities in real-time applications that promise to revolutionize how we understand and interact with the human mind. His expertise in blending intricate mechanistic insights with overarching psychological perspectives has led to groundbreaking work, especially in the realm of physiological mediators of psychological stress. Boasting an impressive portfolio of 6 published research articles in scientific journals and a contribution to the Encyclopedia of Mental Health, Friedman's second edition, Dr. Piper's academic credentials are unquestionable. He brings 14 years of experience in data analysis, statistics, and research design, along with 6 years dedicated to machine learning, signal processing, and computational modeling using Python and its various libraries like NumPy, SciPy, Pandas, Stats models, scikit-learn, and TensorFlow. Today, Dr. Piper will share his valuable insights about working in the neurotech industry. He will also address some of the most common questions people have about embarking and succeeding in a career in this exciting and rapidly evolving field. Whether you are a budding neuroscientist, an inspiring data scientist, or just intrigued by the limitless possibilities of neurotechnology, this episode is for you. So sit back, tune in, and get ready to dive into the fascinating world of neurotech with Dr. Walter Piper. Welcome, Walter. It's a great pleasure to have you today on our podcast. Thank you very much for joining. And can you tell us, please, where you are joining us from? From what part of the world?
Right now, I'm in New York City in Midtown Manhattan in the neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen. So West Midtown, a very dense urban area.
Yes, and you mentioned before our podcast that sometimes the area can be fairly noisy. I didn't expect such a noise living here in Florida, in the suburbs. We actually hear here owls and other birds all the time, and you are experiencing many different noises around you. So it's a very different atmosphere, very different perspective, and also very rapid pace, as I understand, of life in general. What is your feel for the place where you live?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very busy area. There's often gridlocked traffic for hours a day right outside my bedroom window. I live just outside the touristy area, so I'm only a few blocks from Times Square. Fortunately, my avenue gets a little bit less traffic than Times Square, but it's still pretty busy over here. And in general, the New York spirit really involves a lot of people who are very focused on their careers, and they tend to have a lot of social skills, and yet they also tend to be very cautious with strangers. So I find that people are very kind if you have them in the right context, but they also try to really keep to themselves for the sake of safety and for making the most out of their own day. People like to have control over their own time, but I think it's a wonderful place to live.
Absolutely, and to live and to work. And you work at an amazing company. Can you tell our listeners more about the company you are working at?
Yes. So I work at Neurable, which is a neurotech startup based in Boston. And our specialty is to integrate EEG into consumer headphones. So this is a prototype that is about a year old at this point, and we are getting ready to launch the final version of this into the consumer space just in the next few months. We are partnering with a luxury headphone maker called Master and Dynamic, so they are taking care of the wonderful headphones capabilities that they have, all the things you'd expect from modern headphones like active noise canceling. And then we are providing EEG as well as pipelines to process EEG data that are going to be living on the headphones, mainly for the sake of focus tracking. So the main group of customers that we are targeting first and foremost are knowledge workers. So this would especially benefit remote workers who are wearing headphones as part of their job, as part of their work in front of computers. We have a lot of EEG channels. So the final version is going to have 12 EEG channels, six on each side of the head. So it really gives us a lot of ability to kind of see what's going on in a person's brain, and also allows us to deal with a lot of noise because sometimes, like these electrodes that are around the ear, sometimes there'll be hair underneath or something. But by having so many electrodes, we can really hone in on what signals are the most important and what signals are really shining through all the noise. So we really specialize in using dry EEG sensors that feel very natural. Like with these, it's just like a conductive yarn just built into the ear cups. And we really want to have a seamless user experience by integrating neurotechnology into products that people are already using. So in this case, headphones. And we've really focused on making these headphones look and feel like any other pair of headphones.
Mhm. And of course, noise cancellation is very relevant, especially living in the area like yours, which is amazing and of course very much needed. Can you create a picture for us how people using these headphones will look like, let's say, maybe 5 years from now? What will they be able to do with those headphones? Just a typical person walking the streets of New York. How will it all play out?
Yeah, so the use cases that we're launching with are built around focus tracking. And then a few months after we launch the consumer product, we'll be launching a research kit that will really be a platform to support people in investigating more use cases. So the kinds of use cases that are probably easier to track are the ones that will tend to affect a lot of a person's brain at the same time. So these would be like kind of global brain state changes. So, for example, being very alert versus maybe being very drowsy, that'd be pretty easy to pick up. And then over time, we will get better and better at honing in on the little things that are harder to track. Like maybe in the future, we'll be able to see more things like there's a certain pattern of activity on the left side of the brain, and maybe that relates to language. Maybe we'll be able to see a lot more about very precise things. And there are some specials on some streaming networks. I think one was on Netflix, but I'm having trouble remembering the name off the top of my head, that sort of has a far future vision of how this stuff would work. And maybe in 10 years, it includes things like detecting when maybe you're in a conversation and somebody is annoying you, and maybe detects that that person is annoying you and tries to silence that person specifically. And I don't mean to say that's gonna be, like, the only thing or the main thing that we would do, but aside from also what we can see in the brain, there's also going to be more and more integration with other kinds of software. We're in this Internet of Things era. One example that I like to give students of what could be possible is, like, imagine a house where the lighting design is responsive to your brain state. So maybe you have earbuds while you're trying to sleep. And as you are lying in bed, maybe the lighting of the environment is lulling you to sleep. there will be a lot more integrations with other software, with other devices. And I think if people really understand that framework, then a lot of people can start thinking of more and more designs. And ultimately, we are aiming to make a software development kit and gain the capacity to have third party applications. So we really want to not just have our use cases out there, but support an ecosystem and a platform for other people to build applications.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for providing this framework within which we can start thinking about the combination of different applications or integrations of various applications. Do we have currently any examples of such integrations in the current neurotech market?
So right now we are building a product that will behave a little bit like a Fitbit, but for your brain. Whereas a Fitbit is going to be tracking your physical biometrics, kind of like your heart rate, which can say a lot about exercise, but it can also say a lot about the sleep you're getting and the quality of the sleep. There's things like I have a Fitbit, so I'm often looking at what my resting heart rate is estimated to be in the morning, and I've noticed that if I'm sleeping well, that tends to be lower, and if I'm not sleeping well for a while, that resting heart rate gets higher and higher. And so we have some analogs that we are researching that will tell us similar things about like the quality of your sleep, like how responsive your brain is to things like closing your eyes. Like, is that going to induce rapid brain changes? And if somebody is well rested, it does tend to induce rapid brain changes. But these things can also relate a lot to like when you're trying to focus on something. And I think most importantly, this stuff happens around work. So people, especially knowledge workers, are really spending a lot of mental energy in their day. So minute to minute, hour to hour, they're really trying to keep their brain on and activated. And sometimes that's just too much. So, for example, one of the things we've already developed is a way to identify when somebody is getting fatigued, when they need to take a step back, take a short break to get their brain refreshed. Those are some examples of things that we're already developing and are launching with our initial product in a few months.
That is amazing. I already want to try it out. And that's so important. The insights into our brain and how can we behave with it when we need to get it some rest, when we need to focus, and how we can help ourselves to do that. Also, getting in certain states of, let's say, some people are talking states of flow, meditation, and maybe also based on our brain activity. So there are so many things that we can integrate into our daily lives and become and more productive and have a better life work balance because we will know when to rest and how to give our brain this rest.
Exactly, exactly. And that work life balance is something that we are very focused on trying to make better for people. And I think that's a huge part of our potential of our product and of our goals as a company to sort of facilitate people's mental health and wellness as they're going through their daily life.
Absolutely, because we definitely have a lot of problems related to that, and one of the reasons might be exactly that that we haven't had really insights into our brain for a very long time. So hopefully this will be a life-changing opportunities for many, many, many of us. Excellent, very and very interesting, and I will be following all the developments of your company. Now I'm very curious of how did you get into this field? How did you get to the stage where you are helping people to get insights about their brain? When did it start?
Yes. So for me, it's been a long and winding road through many fields. And I guess I can give two different histories, one for me personally and one for the company. So for me personally, I think when I was younger, I didn't have a whole lot of direction. When I was starting college, I was thinking like, oh, I would love to be a medical doctor someday. So I found the most difficult major at the university I was planning to go to, which was biochemistry, and really studied that. And a lot of things I found fascinating, but I eventually realized that maybe like being a physician was not a good fit for my personality. So I like to think very deeply about things. I don't necessarily like very intense pressure. And I also kind of knew that I was especially interested in being an emergency room doctor. And I kind of realized that the consequences of that for my personality would not be good. In that job, in that profession, unfortunately, a lot of patients do pass away. And I knew that that kind of thing would haunt me. And instead, my personality is a better fit for a job where I can really step back and think very deeply about things. And then on my own time, sort of make the world better for everybody. So I did move more towards wanting to be in science. So I went through a period of a couple months where I actually learned about every field of science that biochemistry was applicable to until I found something that really felt like a good fit for me. And I settled on neuroscience. I had had a lot of experience with people with mental health problems. And so that really motivated me to focus on like neuropsychology and neuroscience. So at the university I was at, and this was near the end of my undergraduate work, so I found a professor named Dr. Serena Rodriguez Saturn, who was a psychology professor trained in neuroscience, who focused on things like social bonding, the oxytocin system. And I worked with her for a master's program. And where we really studied pro-social emotions. So sort of what is going on in the brain and body as people are socially connecting with each other and forming relationships. And that was very, very fascinating. In her lab, we used a lot of measures of the autonomic nervous system. So this would be like heart rate variability, electrodermal activity. So this gets at the parts of the nervous system that are like the fight and flight response on one hand versus the rest and digest system on the other hand. So really kind of understanding how different emotional states and energy demands are tweaking how the body is adjusting its energy.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to focus just for a little bit on this, in my opinion, very successful approach of identifying what you want when you are unsure. You said that you spent several months just really researching various fields of where your background as a biochemist would be applicable. Can you tell a little bit more about that process? So, what fields did you investigate? How did you approach each of the field? And how did you make that final decision that, no, actually, neuroscience is what I want to do?
Yes. So I actually used a single tool, which was Google Scholar. For anybody who doesn't know, it's a database of scientific publications that's easily accessible, at least if you want to see the abstracts or sort of the summaries of papers. And so I used that to find papers in many, many different fields. And I just kept doing that until I found things that consistently excited me. And those things ended up being the things that are in neuroscience, especially the things that are more relevant to psychiatry, such as the dopamine system, norepinephrine, serotonin, things like that. And these are things that the concept of like dopamine or serotonin have been in our culture for a while. But if you really want to know about like the exact mechanisms of why they relate to the things that people say they relate to, a lot of that is not as well understood as people tend to assume. And so really digging into those questions are what would really excite me when I was like finding these articles. And so when I found some authors where their work was consistently exciting me, that was when I knew I found the next field that I was going into. And that started me on a journey that I've really never looked back on. I've changed course a little bit within the field of neuroscience for very coherent reasons, but I sort of see it all since that time I settled on neuroscience as a continuous career.
Yes. So, from what you said, I understood your main beacon was the really feeling excited about the field. So, that was your main measure. And when you found that, you said, aha, here it is. This is what I will be studying. Yeah, that is very important. Um, Now, basically, your biomarker of, of what you really want to do. Yes, it was this feeling of excitement. And you did your master's, you worked on the relationship between people, oxytocin. You were using different physiological, electrophysiological measurements. How did you get to the point when you got interested specifically in neurotechnologies and even not just neurotechnologies, but brain computer interfaces? How did all that develop? Even not getting to the company maybe yet, because you still had the whole PhD, yes, after your master's. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, and you're really asking the right questions. So after my master's, I did a PhD, and my topic was more invasive animal research. And at the time, I was thinking I would do research that would be relevant to the field of psychiatry. I was thinking sort of the dream would be to find a system where maybe better psychiatric drugs could be developed. And so the lab that I did that in looked at what people often consider to be an animal model of PTSD. So, sort of what some would call fear conditioning. My lab called Pavlovian threat conditioning, and this part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala in undergraduate textbooks is often referred to as like this center of emotions. But to be more precise, it's sort of like a naturally implemented machine learning architecture, where on one hand you have things like pain or maybe like good tasting food, things that sort of have this intrinsic value, whether positive or negative. And on the other hand, you have cues or signals that signal those things are nearby. So for threat conditioning, it's how people sort of unconsciously learn about danger, like what predicts that danger is nearby. And so you can imagine how that might be related to things like PTSD, where that system is sort of overactive. And then why that led me to brain computer interfacing. So as I really dug into the mechanisms of that system, because that's what I was really interested in, was the mechanisms, I found that it wasn't that simple. It wasn't something where there was just like a certain system that always did this one thing in this one way. I found instead that there were several systems that were interacting, and depending on the circumstances that somebody was going through, it would do different things. If you wanted to maybe intervene, maybe, for example, limit the impacts of trauma, if we're going to go to the PTSD example, the answer is not so simple. You can't necessarily just give somebody a drug and expect that it will just cure PTSD, not affect anything else. What instead I learned is that the solution is really to understand what the brain needs at a certain time point. And that's something that a drug can't solve, because a drug is chronically administered, is often not very precise. So the reason why I got into brain computer interfacing was sort of this realization that you need a system to understand what's going on in real time with a lot more complexity. And I realized that it is possible to sort of build an AI system to start interpreting what a person's brain needs in real time to optimize their mental health. And that gave me this vision that led me ultimately to Neurable. I think actually delivering on that vision, like getting something that would, say, limit the impact of PTSD, is still fairly far off. But what I'm doing at Neurable, I believe, is some of the first steps to actually have computers interfacing with people's brains in a way where we're understanding people's mental states. For Neurable, we're tracking focus, but then how well people can sort of manage their focus, their mental resources does affect their stress levels. So you can sort of see there starts to be some connection there where helping people better deal with stress is maybe a small step to addressing some of these issues that I had been thinking about previously, like PTSD, for example.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your path with us. And my next question is you decided after your PhD to join industry. Why did you make this decision instead of continuing your research, developing technologies in academia, doing your postdoc, then professorship, and we know the usual route and what influenced your decision?
Yes, so there's a story there too. So thinking back to, um, I remember the 1990s were often called the decade of the brain, and people would talk about all these amazing new technologies for things like brain scanning, like fMRI, to start understanding people's brain. And a common way to understand where we were as a society was that we can start to look at the brain, but we barely understand it at all. And I think to some extent, society still carries that mindset even to this day. But from actually being in a PhD program in neuroscience, I started seeing that the 20 to 25 years now since the 90s, we actually do have a pretty good idea of what the brain is doing and why. We've advanced so far. And I believe that it was time to start taking these insights that we had learned in basic neuroscience in these labs and start applying that into people's lives. And I really believe that industry is how you do that, how you design products that can really reach a lot of people in tangible ways that benefit them. And then that brings us to Neurable, and we have an upcoming product launch where we want to help knowledge workers better manage their mental resources. So, like I said, I think my career has really had a very coherent flow, even though I've sort of changed courses a few times.
Absolutely, absolutely understandable. And actually, I see many people who are willing to join industry. I receive so many messages where people are asking how to transition from academia to industry, how to find their first job after they finished PhD in industry. How was it for you to find your job in industry? How did you get your job at Neurable specifically? Can you share your process?
Yes, so that was not easy. After my PhD, I wasn't unemployed for almost a year, although a lot of that time I was doing a data science boot camp. I wasn't inactive during that time. I was job searching. I was also doing this data science boot camp. For those who don't know, the data science boot camp, there's a lot of different kinds, a lot of different groups that do it, but it's a way for people like scientists who are highly trained in quantitative methods to pick up these like industry skills. Like, how do you actually use computers to implement quantitative models in a way that's appropriate for industry? How do you achieve a lot of productivity in new ways in a rapid fashion? So that's what a data science bootcamp is really good for. So that's why I did that. And about halfway through, or actually around the start of when I was doing that boot camp, I connected with Neurable's Discord community. Discord, again, is sort of an online forum system. There's an app for it. But I got into their community and I was really drawn in because there was so much discussion about neuroscience. And as somebody who had gone through a PhD program, I could really provide a lot of nuance, a lot of context. And in doing so, I guess I got noticed. So from there, I realized that the co-founders were starting to notice me, and so eventually I applied for a job, and over the course of a few months, I did the various interviews in the process of getting a job and ultimately succeeded. And so I joined Neurable in August of 2021 and got to work right away. Moved up to Boston for a year before coming back home to New York City because my wife is here. But it has been a very productive time. I've been able to contribute a lot of things, some of which are sort of at the back burner. Like I did some heart rate variability work, but then I also did some things like I mentioned, the algorithms that detect when to take a mental break when you're sort of getting fatigued. That was something that I contributed that is sort of rising to the surface. I did a lot of sort of research. Like Neurable has a research lab where they're continuously bringing in participants. When I started, it was a lot of like cognitive psychology tasks, but now more and more we're going to user testing. So actually seeing how people are using our product with their own workday. And since then, so I've continued doing a lot of data analysis, also building algorithms that will sort of do those analyses in real time. And then that kind of can sort of become part of a product. And I've also done more and more of partnership support. So I think a very important thing for a company in the neurotech industry is partnering with the appropriate people. So this could be clinical research labs or labs from other companies that are doing innovative things. We have some grants with the United States Department of Defense. They have specifically a small business innovation and research program, and so we're doing that. They really like to focus on what's called dual use technologies, which are things that have value to civilians but could also be used for the military. So you can imagine like tracking people's focus and optimizing people's sort of mental wellness and ability to focus on things is a really good way to optimize people's ability to learn. And that's really important for training, just like it's important for civilians at work in front of a computer.
Yes, absolutely fascinating. What was the biggest difference that you noticed between being in academia, doing your PhD, being in these academic settings, and, like you said, fast-paced startup environment? So, what were main differences that you noticed?
Yeah, I'm smiling because you're asking all the right questions, very hard-hitting questions that really get at very important points. So yes, there's a many very big differences between the academic setting and the industry setting. So the pace of the work is very different. In academic science, it tends to be you spend a lot of time on certain projects, and you do that so that you can publish these papers that are very good carriers of knowledge that other people can trust, that the work doesn't have to be redone. And there's a lot of transparency, there's a lot of open communication. You're really pushing knowledge into the global scientific ecosystem. Whereas at a company, it's a lot more about rapid prototyping, rapid work, and the number of projects you do in maybe a year is much higher, but you also have to move through those projects much faster. The projects build on each other a lot more because there's so many more levels of progression, and you sort of have to be a very good project manager to make sure that everything continuously ties together in the right way. There's another big difference that's very important, which is, I'd say, communication. In academic science, there is some interdisciplinary work, but the main focus is people staying within their discipline. So people who are neuroscientists are interacting with other neuroscientists and going really deep into neuroscience. Whereas in industry, it's like there are some neuroscientists, and then we also work with hardware engineers. We work with software engineers. we work with business people, and those business people are doing different things, whether that's investor relations or maybe user testing specialists or product design, people who are really thinking about like how the product is actually going to be used. And I'd say the one of the common pitfalls is that people who have been very deep in a given field for a long time have a very set mental context. And then when they're interacting with people from another field, they don't always know what the other person's mental context is. And so having frequent communication is very easy to make assumptions about somebody else's field because you don't know all the details. And you have to be very aware of the dangers of that, that you can't just make assumptions about somebody's work. Maybe if somebody says, like, project A is done, that means that there's been a lot of progress, but maybe you might not realize that down the road they're going to have to do different things to adjust those things. And also, you have to, it's bi-directional. You have to communicate your things too. So, for one example, with neuroscience, we know that people's brains can act differently on the same task on different days. And people from other fields might not realize that. That's actually something that has come up again and again, is that people who are not trained in neuroscience tend to think of a brain as a machine where like an input goes in and the same input will always come out, but that's not the way the brain works. Based off of what's going on in a person's head, for any number of reasons, people's brains can react differently to the same stimulus on different days or different hours. So a lot of neuroscientists will talk about individual variability, like variation between individuals, but there's also variation between trials, between days. So communication is really key. So continuing on with communication, being very persistent, talking to your colleagues who are in different fields again and again and again. That is something that has to happen in industry to be successful. That is much more of a thing than in academic science. So I'd say overall the pace of the work, but also the level of communication that's required within a given group are both very different.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What was the most challenging thing for you in this transition from academia to industry, and how did you solve it?
Yeah, I'd say the honestly, the communication thing was hard. I think people who are very technically minded, they like to focus on their work. They like to block out distractions. For a lot of us, we want to just have a day where we don't talk to anybody. We just work on our task and get it done. Um, but it's easy for people like that to fall into a trap of doing that too much. Maybe if somebody works on their own thing for 1 or 2 weeks straight without talking to the other stakeholders, they might not realize that they're getting out of scope. Like the scope of a project is something we talk about a lot. Like you're doing something that in your head is important for all these reasons you can think of, but maybe the business imagines its relationship with customers as critically dependent on certain features of a product. And what you're imagining in your head as the technical person might not be exactly what maybe the product manager is thinking for what they know users will respond to. So there has to be a lot of communication there. So I think running into these pitfalls enough times, I slowly learned to be better about this. Also, learning to use computer systems like Git, things that are good for when people are collaboratively working on the same software packages. There's these version management tools that people have to use so that people are not repeating each other's work, but collaborating appropriately. That's something that's much more of a big deal in industry than it would be in academia. And yeah, I'd say like I'm still working on some of that stuff because I have to be working with computer scientists who have always been trained in these things to build like industrial code bases, whereas I never learned that stuff in school. So that's sort of an on the job learning for me.
Yeah, I can imagine there is a lot of on-job learning in industry because there are different things and different teams that you need to integrate your work with and learn new things as you go. So it's ongoing learning experiences, as I can imagine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for again sharing this and those challenges. And what the question that came to me is because for me it's also a fairly new experience. I from work in medical settings. I worked for many years in the hospitals doing research. Now I started working for a neurotech company, and a level of communication, you never don't know exactly how much is enough. For example, if you want to complete the task, you are given a task. So do you want to complete it the whole and then to get feedback? Do you want to complete a little part and get feedback? You want to be fairly independent and not to also take somebody else's time and complete everything. But then, as you said, there are so many other stakeholders that might think a little bit different about the process. So where to find that golden line of being still independent, completing your project, but also getting input from other people? Do you have any suggestions about that?
Yeah, that is really hard, and it does take time to learn, like, how is it going to work with a specific company, with the specific colleagues and other stakeholders around you. So aside from time, I like to say good intentions and staying focused. If you are staying focused with good intentions, over time, you will start getting it right. So I've found in a innovative field like neurotech, good intentions really do go a long way.
Good. And of course, sometimes even if you know advice, you know how to do things, you still need to experience it and learn how to behave in this particular situation, in this particular project or this company. So experience here is the key with good intentions. So that's, I think, is a very important component. And as you said that you were completing this data science boot camp, how did you feel it prepared you for this work in industry? What are maybe other things that you feel made this transition between academia and industry easier for you?
So two things come to mind, one being the speed at which I could complete coding work. So a lot of neuroscientists are computational neuroscientists, and even though I learned some of those skills in my PhD program, that was not actually my PhD work. I was more on the experimental and biological side. So doing the data science boot camp helped me get a lot faster with coding, with computer programming. And the other thing that it really helped me learn, there's a lot of these, I guess I could call them traditional machine learning models, all these different machine learning models that if you're approaching a problem that you're not sure how to address, but you have some sense of what details might be relevant, then you can throw one of these traditional machine learning models at the problem. So, for example, there's one kind of model called a random forest where you can include tons and tons and tons of different features that you think might be important, and it will automatically find the features that are most important. And that can sort of narrow down a problem space in a way that is much harder to do on your own. In my time at Neurable, I've actually had success with addressing things outside of my expertise. So I'm not an electrical engineer, but when we were having some electrical engineering problems, I was able to throw some of these generic data science approaches at it to help the team as a whole understand it a lot better. And that led to better algorithms and better ways to control the quality of the data.
Yes, so I think at Neuralink they call it basic principles. Yes, so if you understand the basic principles of, let's say, engineering, computer science, just physics even, you can solve then virtually any problem. Now I have a question about the job application. You said that it involved several rounds, so it was quite a complex process. Can you comment on that? What, looking back, were the best strategies that you used, and maybe you can provide some advice to people who will be going through this process or are undergoing this process? What should they pay attention to?
Yeah. So these positions tend to be very highly competitive, and oftentimes it's outside of a person's control. The company is looking for somebody with the best set of skills for a certain set of tasks. So a lot of times, I know from my experience as a job seeker, it was frustrating to see how many times I was getting rejected. But looking back, it's really more about the fit between a person's skill sets and what the company is looking for. So having a thick skin is, I'd say, the most important thing of all. Don't take it personally if you're getting rejections. In fact, the more ambitious your job search is, the more rejections you're going to get. Another thing is learn from all of your interactions with people who are working at companies. So, doing informational interviews is a very good way to do that, sort of networking with people who are in the kinds of job that you would want so you can learn about it. If you are progressing through interview processes, even if you get a rejection later on, you can often learn a lot from what people are telling you. Oftentimes, people will point out the discrepancies between the skill sets that you have and what they're looking for. And if you, as a job seeker, really keep track of that in a way that's very calm and even handed, that can really show you what you need to prepare better for next time. Persistence is key. This stuff is going to take a long time. But also, one thing that maybe is not talked about as much is sort of the speed of productivity. So, a lot of data heavy jobs will have sort of a take home assignment. And if you can do that either quickly or, and I say the or because I wasn't necessarily super quick, but very comprehensive, that's a huge strength. People will be paying attention to the speed and the caliber of your work, and they're going to see it as representative of how you would work if you were on their team. So if you sort of are lazy about an assignment, that's going to show.
Thank you so much. Very, very helpful advice. From your point of view, what would be three things not to do when applying for a job?
One mistake I see is that people can be very pushy. So you have to find a balance because another mistake people will make is not communicating with people that could give them an advantage or help them learn something. So if people are too shy, then that's a problem because there's all sorts of things they won't learn that they need to learn. But then on the other hand, if you're messaging somebody again and again and again, and they're not really giving you what you want, that's not going to look great either because these people are very, very busy. I know I'm very, very busy and I try to make time to talk to people, but like messaging me again and again and again is not necessarily going to make things go better. So that's something not to do. Is you want to engage in a friendly way, but also be aware that people are very busy and that you can't force people to hire you.
Yes. So how much is enough? Let's say, how many messages would you recommend that? Yeah, it's still okay, but after that, it means that maybe the person needs to put things on a pause.
I think really feel it out in a very respectful way. It's definitely okay to ask questions, to put information in front of people. The problems are more if somebody is trying to send the same information and again, expecting a different response, then that's a problem.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much. And before we started recording our conversation, you also mentioned that you receive many messages from people asking advice. I would like to address those three major categories of people that you are giving advice to. And you mentioned high school students, then more advanced already university students, and then people who want to get in neurotech from maybe other fields and whatnot. So can we start with high school students? What are the most common questions that they're asking, and how would you address them?
Yes. So high school students are often building their mental models about the kind of world that they want to go into. They're going to have a lot of gaps in their knowledge. A lot of them will have good intentions, which goes a long way. Like, when in doubt, approach the situation with good intentions. So, a common question is, especially for high schoolers who are preparing for college, is like, what field do I study in college? For neurotech, I think the most common things to study would be neuroscience or electrical engineering. Another very solid approach is computer science, because, I mean, computers is part of the brain computer interfacing equation. But then there are other possibilities too. And as the brain and computer interface sector grows more and more, these other things are also going to become bigger. And these are things like that apply to maybe business majors or people who are trained to do product thinking or user testing. Those things are going to be important too. Like, people who are studying communications might be really good at like setting up partnerships or making connections. So there's sort of a confluence between brain computer interfacing has traditionally been an academic discipline. So you do have like neuroscience and electrical engineering going into that. But then you also have what's coming in the future, which is going to be like, how does that intersect with the business world, with the human world?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And people in psychology, actually, there are quite a few people, of course, who take classes in programming, in data analysis. That is also a discipline that so some people might choose. You came from this background. Yes, this was your work that you were doing during your graduate studies. Yeah, so we have an excellent
Yes.
example.
Yes, psychology. Sometimes I forget to say psychology because it's often, I often think of it as a sub area within neuroscience, but it's, to a lot of people, it's a separate field. So yes, psychology is also very important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Wonderful. And so we have advice for high school students. Let's go to the next. And these are already students at the universities. What is their main question for you, and how do you answer it?
Yes, so I've noticed two themes that different people bring to me. One theme is people who are still figuring out exactly what they want to do. So they're going to ask me a lot of questions about, like, what does this actually look like in practice? What is the vision that you have, that I have? Like, where is this vision going? And for them, they want to know, is this a place that they can see themselves maturing and being very satisfied with? And then there's going to be people who are already settled on going in the neurotech direction, and those people are going to want more about, how do I kind of prepare my resume? How do I make the connections? How do I land a job? And that's starting to look like what I would tell job seekers, but they're not quite done with their education yet. So I might tell them, like, maybe they have some electives they haven't decided on. And so maybe I'll tell them to like study maybe some computer programming if that's not something they've already had, or psychology, or depending on like what field they're already studying in. I try to help them identify what gaps that they might have. I also tell them to network a lot. Networking is really important for a lot of different reasons. Even for people who are not actively seeking a job yet, networking is going to help them gain some reality about what the jobs, what the companies are like, and it really helps them orient themselves as to like, how can they approach the field in a way where they're bringing something that addresses needs that the field still has, but also strengthens themselves in terms of being good candidates. Especially as people are approaching the end of undergrad, they'll often be thinking about internships a lot. Graduate students are also thinking about internships a lot. So that's something that people are always asking about. And companies kind of like at Neurable, we ebb and flow in terms of how many interns we take on, depending on how busy we are. If we're very busy, we might actually have less interns because we need to focus on our core work. But then in other times when we're being very expansive, like maybe the best thing that I've seen interns bring to the table is figuring out new applications and use cases for our technology. Interns are very good at that, at bringing in new ideas, and that's a huge strength. And there is like a huge number of people looking to get into neurotech, and a lot of them are very qualified. So I've become very passionate about wanting to support the next generation of neurotech workers because the field is going to expand, but the number of people seeking these jobs is expanding even faster. And that's a little bit scary because I wish I could just give jobs to everybody who is qualified. It breaks my heart a tiny bit that I can't.
Yeah, but it's intention that counts. So, yeah.
Yes.
And speaking about internships, it's time actually for applications. I think it soon will be ending applications for already for the summer. What would be your recommendations for people who are applying for internships? What to pay attention at their applications? And yeah, so that would be the main question. Maybe we can help some applicants with the advice.
Yes. So I'd say two things. One, going back to networking, some companies are going to be offering more internships than others. Don't be afraid to shop around, keep looking at different companies. So networking is very important. The other thing I would say is people at universities, undergraduates at universities, have a lot of opportunities to work on projects that are relevant. So sometimes this would be in academic labs. It could also be maybe data science kind of projects, like data analysis projects that they do on their own. But having significant projects that they can put on their resume that dovetail with what a company does. That's also really important.
Mhm. And how to stand out in this application process among so many other applicants? What do you see is important in a potential internship applicant or even job applicant?
Yes. So aside from pursuing relevant skills, I'd say vision is very important. Vision is something we talk a lot about with like entrepreneurs, but every company has a mission, every company has a vision, and we all appreciate job seekers and internship seekers who have their own vision that they can discuss. Like if a potential intern is talking to me and states a vision that gets me excited, that's going to make me remember them. That's going to up their chances of getting that internship. So a lot of people are not thinking as much about vision, but they really should. Like, what is their vision for what this technology could do? Really think about that, emphasize that. That's not going to come just from technical skills, but is very important.
Yeah, it shows that the person is thinking, that they really care about the technology, and this is what you appreciate to be brought in into the company. Like you said, that interns, they bring a lot of ideas of potential applications for the products, and this is exactly where this is coming from their vision of the world using this type of technology. Would you recommend adding this vision of possible applications, possible use of the technology in their cover letters to be selected even for the interview? What would be your recommendation in general for the cover letter?
Yes, yes. At least give some hint of it in a cover letter or statement of interest. I mean, it's not until actual conversations where that can really be on display, but definitely at least like give some hint of that vision in a cover letter or statement of interest.
Mhm, mhm. And maybe you can tell what type of cover letters stand out for you among different applicants.
I would say people who already have a good sense of what they want to do. I also look for evidence that people are self aware. Like maybe somebody thinks that they want to get into neurotech, but then on further questioning, they're actually not sure what field they really want to be in. So those people would be less likely to get the internship.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Also, some people are saying that they don't want to join startups in their internships. They want to join big companies because they think that the startups are still not as structured, they don't have very stable workflow, and they will not be able to gain as much a valuable experience as they would get it in already established company. What are your thoughts on that? I have slightly different perspective on it, but I would like to hear your perspective also to inform our listeners.
Yeah, part of that I agree with, part of that I don't. The part I agree with is that startups do tend to be less structured in how they strictly define workflows. Like bigger companies might have very rigid management systems, whereas at startups, people often have to do a lot more of sort of self-managing. Things like time management are very important, being aware of the project, the scope, people being able to think of that stuff themselves rather than relying on other people to do that for them. So startups do tend to have less structure in that sense in terms of like the actual like daily exposure to rigid rules. There's going to be less of that at startups, but doing that like self-tracking, self-management is a really valuable experience in itself, and that is going to set people up to start getting those leadership skills that is really going to help their career long term. And if people are thinking of prestige, like maybe they think a big company might have more prestige than smaller companies, that's not necessarily the case. Like Neurable is a small company, but it's considered pretty elite. And like we have one of our interns recently got a permanent position at Qualcomm. We share the tech ecosystem with these larger companies.
Absolutely. I agree with your approach to this question. And now the last group. So we talked about the group from high school students, university students, and the third group are people who are already applying for jobs. And you were mentioning when you and I talked, certain pain points of the companies applying. I think we touched a little bit on that when we talked about you as an example, yes, and transitioning and working, but maybe there are certain things that we haven't discussed yet. So maybe you can mention those as well.
Yeah. So with job seekers who are seeking permanent positions, it's very much about bringing in skills and vision that, especially at a startup, we're looking for leaders, people who are really going to be able to feel out the needs of a company, who are really going to be able to maybe even take the helm on a certain day or a certain week when maybe other people are too busy to think about much. People who are really able to come in and just like make the company a better place for everybody else. So, for example, when I was coming, I at my company, I'm the most trained in the biological side of neuroscience. I had experience with things like heart rate variability, things that can relate to stress, and that becomes like a huge potential area of brain computer interface applications. So I was bringing in knowledge about a lot of possible applications already and a track record of implementing those and pursuing things in academic science. So I was able to bring a lot to the table. And then I'm also able to sort of step up, help lead partnerships when needed. I say people who can really exhibit leadership skills from the start are going to have a leg up, especially in the startup world.
How can they demonstrate those leadership skills in their application documentation, in the interview?
I would say the projects that they worked on in the past, especially if they're either academic science projects or maybe hobbies that they've worked on for multiple years, a track record of really developing things in a way that could be deployable to real business use cases. That's going to look impressive. And that's really going to be if people can bring in knowledge, skills, and a track record of accomplishment in a domain that the business needs more accomplishment in to get to their goals, that's the best recipe for getting hired.
Mhm. Can you maybe provide some examples of job applications like this that you really found very compelling for hiring those people?
So, say an EEG company is trying to improve the quality of their data, trying to understand how to better work through all the kinds of noise that are getting in the way of interpreting their signal. And then we get a job candidate who has tons of experience with denoising signal and they have a proven track record of that over several years. That's a very good fit. But it could be other things like user testing could already be experience in the industry and maybe another neurotech company. But I think the job seekers that we're often talking to the most are the people who are trying to break into industry for the first time. So people who have a long track record in academic science on working on relevant things or bringing in a strong knowledge base that the company needs, that's going to be very, very helpful.
And what would be a no for a job applicant at your company?
Well, given how competitive these positions are, um, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Keep applying, keep networking. Um, I'm trying to think of the right words here, but be very broad in what you're looking for, but also when you see companies that are a good fit for you, really spend the time to get to know them, to really show why your skills are relevant to them. In a way, it's almost like building an alliance with people. And when you can offer an alliance that is so good that a company can't say no, that's when that company is going to be willing to spend their limited financial resources on paying a salary for you. And that's ultimately what job seekers are mostly looking for is a career that can support them.
Yeah, absolutely. So building an alliance. I like this approach. Thank you. Thank you very much. As we're already nearing the end of our podcast, can you tell our listeners where they can learn more about Neurable, about products you're developing, and also how they can get in touch with you if they have any questions or maybe some collaborative projects proposal? Who knows?
Yeah, so for Neurable, our website was neurable.com. I think as of very recently, that will reroute to neurable.io. Now that we're getting ready to do a product launch, our website is being transformed. But to learn about our products, for sure, neurable.com, neurable.io. To connect with me personally, LinkedIn is the best way to do that. So search for Walter Piper, PhD, maybe throw in Neurable too. Or if you just look for Neurable on LinkedIn, the employee list will include me.
Do you see maybe anything that we haven't covered yet? Maybe we missed some questions that are relevant to today's topics. Anything you might want to share with our listeners?
I think you actually asked so many good questions that got at all the things that I was thinking of. And I'm quite impressed. But I would build off of what I was saying with good intentions that good intentions go a long way. And I've really been impressed at like consistently showing up with good intentions will carry people forward. So when in doubt, have good intentions.
That's a great advice. Thank you so much. And I will take it as well. Thank you. So much valuable advice and information for all our listeners. And I wish you all possible success at your job at developing these absolutely amazing neurotechnologies. And I will be following up for the updates. And I'm sure our listeners will do the same. So thank you very much.
Sounds great. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, thank you for joining us on this incredible journey into the entrepreneurial world of neuroscience and neurotechnologies. I hope you've been inspired by the stories of those who are turning groundbreaking ideas into impactful realities. If you are looking for more guidance on succeeding in Neurocareers, book a free consultation with me, your podcast host, Dr. K, at the Institute of Neuroapproaches. So, what are you waiting for? Let's navigate the path to success in the world of Neurocareers and make the impossible possible together.